Bullies knee the new kid in the face. Big mistake. He was a brutal fighter. Marcus Rivera's sneakers made soft, squeaking sounds against the polished linoleum floor as he navigated the unfamiliar hallways of Westfield High School. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize every imperfection in the aging building's walls, where layers of paint couldn't quite hide the scratches and scuff marks left by thousands of students over the years. At 17, Marcus had perfected the art of walking through a crowd while remaining invisible. His shoulders slightly hunched forward in a way that made his 6-foot frame seem smaller, less threatening. His dark brown eyes, which his mother had once described as warm as melted chocolate, now carried a practiced emptiness that discouraged contact. The black hair that fell across his forehead wasn't just a stylistic choice. It was a curtain he could hide behind when the world became too much to bear. The worn jeans he wore had been purchased from a thrift store 3 towns ago, already broken in by someone else's life, someone else's stories. His faded grey t-shirt bore the logo of a band that had been popular 5 years ago, another careful choice designed to avoid standing out either positively or negatively. Everything about Marcus Rivera's appearance had been calibrated to achieve maximum invisibility, to slide through the social hierarchy of high school without creating ripples in either direction. Moving to a new town 3 weeks into the semester was never easy, but for Marcus, it had become a routine as familiar as breathing. This was his 7th school in 8 years. A consequence of having a father whose military career meant home was wherever the United States Marine Corps decided it should be. Colonel James Rivera was a decorated Marine with 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq under his belt. He was a man who believed in discipline, honor, and the importance of being able to defend oneself in a world that could turn violent without warning. When Marcus had come home from school in Colorado 8 years ago with a black eye, a split lip, and tears streaming down his 9-year-old face, something had changed in his father's eyes. The bullies at Mountain View Elementary had cornered Marcus in the bathroom, held him down, and taken turns hitting him while he cried for help that never came. That night, after his mother had cleaned his wounds and put him to bed, Marcus had heard his parents arguing in hushed tones that weren't quite hushed enough. The next morning, his father had woken him up at dawn, earlier than usual for a school day. They'd driven in silence to a building Marcus had never seen before, a converted warehouse with a sign that read, Warriors Path Mixed Martial Arts Academy. Inside, the smell of sweat and leather was overwhelming, and the sound of bodies hitting mats echoed through the space. Men and women of various ages were already training, some hitting heavy bags that swayed like pendulums, others grappling on the ground in controlled chaos. James Rivera had knelt down to his son's level, his calloused hands on Marcus's small shoulders, and spoken words that would shape the next 8 years of the boy's life. "Son," he had said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom, "there comes a time when a man has to stand up for himself. The world isn't always fair, and sometimes the only thing standing between you and harm is your ability to fight back. But here's the thing, and I need you to understand this completely. Learning to fight isn't about hurting people. It's about having the confidence to walk away from most fights because you know you could win them if you had to. A real warrior, a real man, uses violence as the absolute last resort. You're going to learn to fight so that you hopefully never have to. Do you understand?" Marcus had nodded, not really understanding, but trusting his father completely. That trust had led to 8 years of dedication that bordered on obsession. While other kids played video games or hung out at the mall, Marcus spent his afternoons in gyms that all smelled the same, regardless of what state they were in. He learned karate first, the traditional Shotokan style that emphasized discipline and form over flashiness. His sensei, Master Tanaka, had been a stern Japanese man in his 60s who believed that every movement should be perfect, that muscle memory was built through 10,000 repetitions of the same technique. By the time Marcus was 12, he had earned his black belt in karate and had begun training in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. The ground game was completely different from the standing techniques of karate, requiring a different kind of thinking, a chess-like approach to combat where leverage and technique could overcome raw strength. His BJJ instructor, a former MMA fighter named Carlos the Spider Mendoza, had taken a special interest in Marcus, recognizing in the quiet boy a natural aptitude for reading body language and anticipating opponents' moves. Boxing had come next, when Marcus was 14. His father had found him a coach who had trained Golden Gloves champions, an old Irish-American named Mickey O'Brien, who looked like he'd stepped out of a boxing movie from the 1970s. Mickey had taught Marcus that boxing wasn't just about throwing punches, it was about footwork, timing, and the ability to take a hit and keep moving forward. Under Mickey's tutelage, Marcus had learned to read the rhythm of a fight, to see openings that lasted fractions of seconds, to deliver combinations that flowed like water. The result of all this training was that Marcus Rivera, at 17, was essentially a weapon wrapped in the disguise of a mild-mannered teenager. He could break someone's arm with a jiu-jitsu armbar as easily as most people could tie their shoes. His roundhouse kick, perfected through thousands of hours of practice, could knock a grown man unconscious. His hands, which looked soft and unremarkable, could deliver a boxing combination fast enough that most people wouldn't see the individual punches, just the devastating result. But with all this ability came the weight of responsibility. James Rivera had made it clear from the beginning that these skills came with conditions. If you use what you learn to bully others, to intimidate, to show off, I will personally make sure you never set foot in a gym again, he had warned. These techniques are for protection, for self-defense, for those moments when walking away isn't an option. Every time you fight when you don't have to, you dishonor everything I've taught you. So Marcus had learned to absorb punishment that he could easily dish out. In his previous schools, he'd been pushed, shoved, had his lunch money stolen, been locked in lockers, and endured countless other humiliations, all while knowing he could end the torment with a few well-placed strikes. But he'd made a promise to his father and to himself. He would only fight when he absolutely had no other choice, when walking away was no longer an option. The hallways of Westfield High School were typical of any suburban school built in the 1980s. The lockers were that particular shade of beige that seemed designed to be as inoffensive as possible, though generations of students had done their best to add character through scratches, dents, and the occasional attempt at graffiti that was quickly painted over by the maintenance staff. The floor was a checkerboard pattern of white and black tiles, though the white had long ago faded to a dull grey, and the black showed every scuff mark from every sneaker that had ever walked these halls. Marcus found his assigned locker, number 487, on the second floor near the science labs. The combination lock was stiff, requiring him to try 3 times before it finally opened. Inside, someone had left a piece of gum stuck to the top shelf, now hardened into a fossilized reminder of the locker's previous occupant. Marcus carefully arranged his textbooks, creating a system that would allow him to minimize trips to his locker between classes. Efficiency was important when you were trying to avoid notice. He could feel eyes on him as he worked, that familiar sensation of being assessed, categorized, and filed away in the social hierarchy of high school. New students were always subjects of interest, temporary celebrities whose fame would last exactly as long as it took for people to decide where they fit in the complex ecosystem of teenage social dynamics. Marcus had been through this process enough times to know that the key was to avoid making any strong impression in any direction. Don't be too smart or too dumb, too friendly or too aloof, to anything that might draw unwanted attention. The warning bell rang, a harsh electronic sound that seemed designed to be impossible to ignore. Marcus closed his locker and consulted the schedule he'd memorized the night before. First period was English literature with Mrs. Patterson in room 203. He'd deliberately arrived early enough to locate all his classrooms before the day began, another strategy for avoiding the lost new kid stereotype that could mark someone as an easy target. He was just turning away from his locker when he heard the voice that would come to haunt his days at Westfield High. It was the kind of voice that carried natural authority, the voice of someone who had never had to question their place in the world because that place had always been at the top. Well, what do we have here? Today, Marcus turned slowly, his body automatically shifting into a neutral stance that would allow him to move in any direction if necessary. The speaker was a stocky teenager with bleached blonde hair, styled in that deliberately messy way that probably took 30 minutes to achieve. He wore designer jeans that cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe and a Letterman jacket, despite the warm September weather. His face had the soft features of someone who had never gone hungry, never had to fight for anything real, but his eyes held a cruelty that Marcus recognized immediately. This was Tyler Morrison, though Marcus didn't know his name yet. Tyler was flanked by two other boys who seemed to orbit around him like satellites around a planet. The taller one on the left was thin in a way that suggested rapid growth rather than malnutrition, with acne scarring on his cheeks, a nervous energy that radiated from him in waves. This was Connor Mitchell, Tyler's best friend since elementary school. Someone who had attached himself to Tyler's rising star and held on for dear life. The other boy, shorter but broader than Tyler, had the build of someone who had played football until recently, muscle just beginning to turn soft from lack of training. Jake Thompson had been the starting linebacker for the JV team until a knee injury ended his season and, possibly, his football career. "I'm Tyler Morrison," the leader announced, with the kind of confidence that came from never having that confidence challenged. His smile was practiced, the kind of smile that politicians wore when they were about to say something they didn't mean. "This is Jake and Connor. We'd like to welcome all the new students personally." Marcus could read the situation like a familiar book, one he'd read in different editions at different schools, but with essentially the same plot. The popular kids establishing dominance over the new arrival, making sure he understood his place in the pecking order before he got any ideas about climbing it. He'd seen this play out enough times to know every beat, every line, every predictable escalation. "I'm Marcus," he said quietly, pitching his voice to be non-threatening, non-challenging. It was a voice he'd practiced, one that suggested submission without quite committing to it. "Marcus," Tyler repeated, drawing out the name like he was tasting it, rolling it around in his mouth to see if he liked the flavor. "That's a pretty fancy name for someone wearing Walmart clothes." The insult was juvenile, but effective in its intent. Jake and Connor laughed on cue, a rehearsed response that suggested this wasn't their first time playing backup to Tyler's lead. Marcus felt the familiar knot forming in his stomach, not from fear, but from the effort it took to suppress his natural responses. His trained eye could see that Tyler was standing with too much weight on his front foot, a common mistake that would make him easy to unbalance. A simple foot sweep would put him on the ground in less than a second, but Marcus pushed that thought away, locked it in the box, where he kept all the violent solutions to non-violent problems. "You know, Marcus," Tyler continued, stepping closer in a way that was meant to be intimidating, "this school has certain traditions, unwritten rules that everyone needs to follow. And one of those traditions is that new kids need to earn their place. They need to show proper respect to those of us who've been here longer." Connor giggled, a high-pitched sound that seemed incongruous with his height. "Yeah, respect is really important around here." Marcus kept his expression neutral, though internally he was mapping exit routes, calculating distances, noting that Jake had an old knee injury based on how he was favoring his left leg slightly. These observations were automatic now, as natural as breathing after 8 years of training. He could disable all 3 of them in under 10 seconds if he had to. Tyler with a strike to the solar plexus to take his wind. Connor with a leg kick to his sciatic nerve that would drop him instantly. Jake with a gentle push that would aggravate that knee injury enough to take him out of the fight without causing permanent damage. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. Not for something as trivial as teenage posturing. "I'm not looking for any trouble," Marcus said, the words coming out exactly as he'd practiced them in the mirror this morning. "I just want to get to class." "Oh, but trouble found you," Connor chimed in, clearly pleased with what he thought was a clever line. He stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over Marcus. "See, we run this hallway. This is our territory, and we don't remember giving you permission to use it." The bell rang, its electronic shriek cutting through the growing tension. Marcus saw his opportunity and took it, shouldering his backpack with a movement that looked casual, but actually shifted his center of gravity in preparation for movement. "I really need to get to first period," he said, trying to step around them. Tyler moved to block his path, his hand coming up to press against Marcus's chest. The touch was light, not quite a push, but the threat was clear. Marcus felt his muscles tense automatically, his body preparing for combat without conscious thought. The hand on his chest could be trapped, the arm broken at the elbow with a simple armbar. Tyler would be on the ground screaming before his friends even realized what had happened. But Marcus forced himself to relax, to accept the disrespect, to swallow the indignity. "Class can wait," Tyler said, his voice losing any pretense of friendliness. "We're having a conversation here, and conversations end when I say they end, not when you decide you want to leave." Other students were starting to notice the confrontation now, forming a loose circle around them with that mixture of excitement and relief that came from watching someone else be victimized. Marcus recognized some of the expressions, the guilty gratitude that it wasn't them in his position, the eager anticipation of drama that would provide gossip for the rest of the day. "You seem like the kind of kid who thinks he's better than everyone else," Tyler continued, his hand still on Marcus's chest. "The kind who thinks he's too good to associate with regular people. Are you too good for us, Marcus? Is that what you think?" Marcus felt the familiar shame washing over him. Not shame at being bullied, but shame at his own inaction, at the promise that kept him from ending this confrontation with the efficiency his training provided. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Violence should be the last resort, son. A real fighter knows when not to fight." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Marcus said evenly, his voice carrying a steadiness that seemed to frustrate Tyler. "See? That right there," Tyler said, pointing at Marcus's face. "That attitude, that tone. You think you're superior. You think you're above all this." Jake laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the lockers. "Maybe we need to teach him some humility." The crowd was growing now, students arriving for first period but stopping to watch the show. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, could sense their judgment. He was being branded in real time as weak, as a victim, as someone who could be pushed around without consequence. It was a label that would follow him for however long he remained at Westfield High, determining how he was treated not just by Tyler and his crew, but by everyone who witnessed this moment. "I just want to go to class," Marcus repeated, hating how plaintive his voice sounded, how weak. Tyler finally removed his hand, but only to pat Marcus on the cheek in a gesture that was deliberately demeaning. "Then go to class, Marcus. Run along like a good little boy, but remember, we'll be watching you. And next time we have a conversation, you better show proper respect." Marcus stepped around them, his face burning with humiliation as he walked through the crowd that parted for him like he had something contagious. He could hear the whispers starting already, could feel his social fate being sealed with every step. Behind him, Tyler's laughter rang out, joined by Jake and Connor, a sound that followed him all the way to room 203. The next few days established a pattern that Marcus knew all too well, a systematic campaign of harassment designed to break his spirit and establish him as the lowest rung on the social ladder. Tyler Morrison, Marcus learned, wasn't just any bully. He was the son of Richard Morrison, who owned 3 car dealerships in the county and whose donations to the school had funded the new computer lab. Tyler's mother was on the school board, which meant that even teachers who might have otherwise intervened chose to look the other way rather than risk their careers. The harassment started small, almost playfully. Tyler and his friends would bump into Marcus in the hallways, always with exaggerated apologies that fooled no one. "Oh, sorry, Marcus. Didn't see you there. You're just so easy to miss." They would sit behind him in the 2 classes they shared, world history and physical education, kicking his chair just hard enough to be annoying, but not hard enough that a teacher would notice. They would make comments just loud enough for Marcus to hear, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability if confronted. In the cafeteria, they developed a routine that seemed designed for maximum humiliation with minimum risk. They would walk past Marcus's table and accidentally knock things over. A carton of milk tipped onto his sandwich, making it inedible. A tray bumped just hard enough to send his apple rolling across the floor. Jake was particularly creative, managing to step on Marcus's backpack in a way that broke the zipper, forcing Marcus to carry his books by hand for the rest of the day until he could get home and fix it with safety pins. Marcus endured it all with the same quiet dignity he'd perfected over the years. He ate lunch alone, choosing a table in the far corner of the cafeteria where he could keep his back to the wall and watch for approaching threats. When the weather was nice, he would take his lunch outside, finding secluded spots where he could eat in peace. He discovered that the space behind the equipment shed near the tennis courts was usually empty, and the janitor's break room was unlocked during lunch if you knew which door to use. He threw himself into his academics with the intensity of someone who had nothing else to focus on. His teachers began to notice his exceptional work, particularly in English literature, where Mrs. Patterson praised his essay on the symbolism in The Great Gatsby. In chemistry, Mr. Rodriguez was impressed by Marcus's lab reports, which showed a methodical attention to detail that most high school students lacked. These small victories felt hollow, though, when he would leave class to find Tyler waiting in the hallway with that predatory smile. The physical education class was the worst. Coach Anderson ran his PE classes like military boot camp, believing that physical fitness and character were intrinsically linked. He was also Tyler Morrison's uncle by marriage, which meant that Tyler had essentially free rein during the 50-minute period. When they played basketball, Tyler would ensure Marcus was constantly fouled, elbowed in the ribs, tripped when the coach wasn't looking. During wrestling units, Tyler would volunteer to demonstrate moves and somehow always ended up paired with Marcus, using the opportunity to apply holds with unnecessary force. Marcus's training made these encounters particularly frustrating. When Tyler attempted a sloppy double-leg takedown during wrestling practice, every fiber of Marcus's being wanted to sprawl, to stuff the takedown and transition into a guillotine choke that would have Tyler tapping out in seconds. Instead, he let himself be taken down, playing the part of the weak victim even as his muscles remembered exactly how to counter every amateur move Tyler attempted. 3 weeks into his time at Westfield High, Marcus had mapped out every bathroom, empty classroom, and alternate route through the building. He knew that the third-floor bathroom near the art rooms was usually empty during lunch. He knew that if he took the stairs by the auditorium, he could avoid the main hallway where Tyler's crew usually congregated between classes. He knew that the library was a safe zone because Mrs. Chen, the librarian, had a zero-tolerance policy for disruption and wasn't afraid of anyone's parents. But he couldn't avoid them forever, and Tyler seemed to take Marcus's avoidance as a personal challenge. The harassment escalated gradually, like a pot slowly coming to boil. The accidental bumps became deliberate shoves. The quiet comments became louder taunts. The pranks became more elaborate and cruel. One morning, Marcus arrived at his locker to find it decorated with printed screenshots from a fake social media profile someone had created in his name. The profile was filled with embarrassing posts about being lonely, about missing his mommy, about being afraid of everything. The pictures were poorly photoshopped images of Marcus's face on the bodies of children, crying babies, and one particularly cruel image of him in a dress. Students gathered around to laugh and take pictures with their phones, ensuring that the humiliation would live on in digital form long after the physical evidence was removed. Marcus stood there for a long moment, staring at his defaced locker, feeling something dark and dangerous stirring in his chest. He could feel his hands forming fists without conscious thought, could feel his body shifting into a fighting stance. For just a moment, he imagined walking down the hallway to where Tyler was holding court with his friends, imagined the look of surprise on Tyler's face when Marcus's fist connected with his jaw, imagined the satisfying crack of bone on bone. But then he saw a freshman girl watching him with sympathy in her eyes, and he forced himself to relax. He carefully removed the pictures from his locker, put them in the trash, and went to class as if nothing had happened. The effort it took to maintain that composure was exhausting, like holding a door closed against hurricane winds. It was on a Tuesday afternoon that things began to escalate beyond the usual harassment. Marcus was sitting alone at his corner table in the cafeteria, trying to eat his sandwich while reading his history textbook. He'd developed the ability to appear completely absorbed in his reading while actually maintaining awareness of his surroundings, a skill that had served him well in previous schools. So he noticed immediately when the cafeteria's ambient noise level dropped, the way it did when something interesting was about to happen. Tyler Morrison was approaching his table with Jake and Connor in tow. But this time they weren't alone. They'd brought an audience, a group of 5 or 6 other students who wanted to watch whatever was about to unfold. Tyler was wearing his Letterman jacket despite the warm afternoon, the white leather sleeves practically glowing under the harsh cafeteria lights. His expression was different today, more focused, more determined. Marcus recognized the look of someone who had decided to escalate, to push boundaries, to see what would break. "Hey, Marcus," Tyler called out, his voice deliberately loud enough to carry across the entire cafeteria. The remaining conversations died out as students turned to watch. "My friends and I have been talking, and we think you might be confused about how things work around here." Marcus looked up from his book, but didn't respond. He'd learned that engaging only made things worse, gave them more material to work with, but his silence seemed to anger Tyler more than any response would have. "See, we think you believe you're too good to hang out with us," Tyler continued, moving closer to Marcus's table. "That hurts our feelings, doesn't it, boys?" The chorus of agreement from his followers was predictable, but Marcus noticed something interesting. Some of the students in the wider audience looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight, avoiding eye contact. Not everyone was enjoying this show, but no one was willing to intervene. "Maybe he thinks he's some kind of tough guy," Connor added, his voice high with nervous excitement. He was bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, like a boxer psyching himself up before a fight. "Maybe he thinks he could take us in a fight." Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks, but he kept his voice level when he spoke. "I don't want any trouble. I just want to eat my lunch." "But you are trouble," Tyler said, placing both hands on Marcus's table and leaning forward. "Your very existence is trouble. The way you walk around here acting like you're better than everyone, like you're above it all, that's trouble." Marcus could smell Tyler's cologne, something expensive and over-applied that made his nose itch. He could see the small scar on Tyler's chin, probably from a childhood accident. He could count the individual gel-spiked hairs in Tyler's deliberately messy hairstyle. Every detail was crystal clear, the way things always became clear when his body was preparing for combat. "Stand up," Tyler commanded suddenly. Marcus remained seated. "Why?" "Because I told you to." "That's not a reason." Tyler's face flushed red. He wasn't used to being questioned, wasn't used to anything but immediate compliance. "Stand up, or I'll make you stand up." The cafeteria was completely silent now. Even the lunch ladies had stopped serving to watch what was happening. Marcus could feel hundreds of eyes on him, waiting to see what he would do. He thought about his father, somewhere in Afghanistan or Iraq, trusting his son to make the right decision. He thought about the promise he'd made, the line he'd drawn for himself. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus closed his textbook and stood up. At his full height, he was actually an inch taller than Tyler, something that clearly surprised the bully. They stood there for a moment face to face, and Marcus could see uncertainty flicker in Tyler's eyes. But then Jake and Connor moved to flank Marcus, and Tyler's confidence returned. "You know what I think," Tyler said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent cafeteria. "I think you're just a coward. I think you talk a big game in your head, but when it comes down to it, you're nothing but a scared little boy who runs away from everything." Marcus felt something inside him crack, like ice beginning to fracture under pressure. But he held himself still, held himself back, even as every instinct screamed at him to act. "Nothing to say?" Tyler taunted. "No clever comeback? No defense?" "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked quietly. "I want you to admit what you are," Tyler said. "I want you to tell everyone here that you're a coward, that you're weak, that you're nothing." The cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. This was beyond normal bullying now. This was ritual humiliation, a public breaking of another human being. Marcus could see the discomfort on some faces, the guilty excitement on others, the morbid fascination that made it impossible for anyone to look away. "I'm not going to do that," Marcus said simply. Tyler's smile was triumphant, as if Marcus had just given him exactly what he wanted. "Then I guess we'll have to convince you." Without warning, Tyler shoved Marcus hard in the chest. Marcus stumbled backward but didn't fall, his training helping him maintain his balance. The shove was followed by another, then another, Tyler pushing him back toward the wall while the crowd parted to give them space. "Come on, Marcus," Tyler taunted between shoves. "Do something. Fight back. Show us you're not completely pathetic." Marcus let himself be pushed, let himself stumble, let himself look weak and helpless. But inside, his mind was calculating angles, distances, possibilities. Tyler was leaving himself completely open with each shove, his balance compromised, his guard non-existent. A simple redirection of his energy would send him flying. A basic hip throw would put him on the ground. Even just shifting his weight at the right moment would cause Tyler to stumble and fall. But Marcus did none of these things. He let Tyler push him all the way to the wall, let the crowd laugh and jeer, let his reputation as a coward be cemented in the minds of everyone present. When his back hit the wall, Tyler grabbed him by the front of his shirt, pulling him forward just to slam him back again. "This is what you are, Marcus," Tyler hissed, his face inches away. "This is all you'll ever be, a victim, a punching bag, a nothing." Then, as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Tyler released Marcus's shirt with a final shove and stepped back, brushing his hands together as if he'd touched something dirty. "Remember this moment, Marcus," Tyler said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Remember that you had the chance to stand up for yourself, and you chose to be a coward instead." As the crowd dispersed, heading to their next classes, Marcus remained against the wall for a moment, his shirt stretched and wrinkled from Tyler's grip. He could hear the whispers, the laughter, the sound of his social death being confirmed. But underneath the humiliation, underneath the burning shame, something else was growing. A cold, calculating anger that he'd never felt before. He straightened his shirt, picked up his backpack, and walked to his next class with his head held high. Let them think he was weak. Let them believe he was a coward. They had no idea what they were dealing with. They had no idea what 8 years of training looked like when it was finally unleashed. They had no idea, but if Tyler Morrison continued down this path, he was going to find out. The days following the cafeteria incident were the worst Marcus had experienced at any school. The public humiliation had marked him in a way that transcended Tyler's immediate circle of influence. Students who had previously ignored him now actively avoided him, as if his victim status was contagious. Teachers pretended not to notice when Tyler would clear his throat meaningfully every time Marcus spoke in class, causing snickers from other students. Even the lunch ladies seemed to give him pitying looks when he went through the line. Marcus threw himself into his training with renewed intensity. Every day after school, he would drive 40 minutes to the next town where there was a proper MMA gym. The owner, a former UFC fighter named Tommy the Tank Rodriguez, had taken one look at Marcus's form during his first visit and immediately recognized someone with serious training. "You're holding back," Tommy observed one afternoon as Marcus worked the heavy bag. "His punch is precise but lacking full power. I can see it in your shoulders. You're pulling every punch." Marcus paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I was taught control is more important than power." "Control is important," Tommy agreed, wrapping his hands to demonstrate. "But there's a difference between control and suppression. You're not controlling your power, you're afraid of it." Tommy stepped up to the bag and unleashed a combination that made the 100-pound bag swing like a pendulum, the chain creaking with each impact. "See, control doesn't mean weak. It means choosing when to be strong." Marcus nodded, understanding the lesson on an intellectual level, but still bound by the promise he'd made to his father. He resumed his training, working through forms and combinations until his muscles burned and his shirt was soaked with sweat. The physical exhaustion was almost enough to quiet the growing rage inside him. Almost. Back at school, Tyler's campaign had evolved beyond simple harassment. He'd begun recruiting others to his cause, turning the bullying of Marcus Rivera into a school-wide sport. Students Marcus had never even spoken to would knock books out of his hands in the hallway. Someone poured honey into his locker, destroying several textbooks and requiring him to spend an entire evening cleaning the sticky mess. His car tires were deflated twice in 1 week, forcing him to use the emergency air compressor he'd learned to keep in his trunk. The administration's response was predictably inadequate. When Marcus finally reported the locker incident to Vice Principal Foster, the man had listened with apparent concern before delivering a response that made it clear nothing would be done. "These are serious allegations, Marcus," Mr. Foster had said, his hands folded on his desk. "But without proof of who did it, there's not much we can do. Have you considered that maybe you're having trouble fitting in because you're holding yourself apart from other students? Sometimes, when we project negativity, we attract negative responses." Marcus had left that office understanding that he was truly on his own. The system that was supposed to protect students was more interested in protecting itself from the potential wrath of wealthy parents like the Morrisons. Justice, fairness, basic human dignity, none of these things mattered as much as keeping influential donors happy. It was a Thursday afternoon when Marcus witnessed something that would fundamentally change his perspective on his situation. He was taking his usual lunchtime walk around the school grounds, having given up on trying to eat in the cafeteria, when he heard crying coming from behind the gymnasium. Following the sound, he found a freshman boy, small for his age, with thick glasses and a Star Wars t-shirt, cornered by 2 sophomores he didn't recognize. "Please, just give it back," the boy was pleading, reaching for what looked like a calculator being held above his head by the taller of the two bullies. "Come on, David," the bully taunted. "Jump for it. Maybe if you try hard enough, you'll actually grow a few inches." Marcus watched for a moment, seeing himself in the younger boy's desperate expression. Then, without conscious thought, he stepped forward. "Give him his calculator back." Both sophomores turned to look at him, and Marcus saw recognition dawn on their faces. He was Marcus Rivera, the school's designated victim, the guy who let Tyler Morrison push him around without fighting back. "Or what?" One of them laughed. "You going to run and tell a teacher?" "Oh wait, you already tried that, didn't it? How'd that work out for you?" Marcus took another step forward, and something in his expression must have changed, because both sophomores took an involuntary step back. "I said, give him his calculator back." "This isn't your business, Rivera," the taller one said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It is now." They stood there for a moment in tense standoff. Then the bully dropped the calculator, letting it clatter on the concrete. "Whatever, it's not worth it. Come on." As they walked away, one called back over his shoulder, "Tyler's going to hear about this." Marcus helped the freshman boy, David, pick up his calculator. The device's screen was cracked from the fall, but it still worked. "Thank you," David said, his voice small. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did," Marcus replied. "Are you okay?" David nodded, then looked at Marcus with something like awe. "Aren't you scared of what Tyler will do when he finds out?" Marcus considered the question. Was he scared? No, he realized. He was tired. Tired of watching bullies hurt people. Tired of systems that protected the powerful at the expense of the weak. Tired of keeping his promise when that promise meant allowing suffering to continue. "Tyler Morrison is going to do what he's going to do regardless," Marcus said. "Might as well give him a real reason." That afternoon, word of Marcus's intervention spread through the school like wildfire. By the time the final bell rang, Tyler was waiting for him in the parking lot with Jake and Connor, their expressions dark with anger. "I heard you've been playing hero," Tyler said as Marcus approached his car, "standing up for losers, interfering with other people's business." Marcus said nothing, just continued walking toward his vehicle. "Hey!" Tyler barked. "I'm talking to you." Marcus stopped and turned slowly to face them. "What do you want, Tyler?" "I want to know who you think you are," Tyler said, stepping closer. "You can't even defend yourself, but you think you can defend other people." "Someone has to." Tyler's face flushed with anger. "You think you're better than me?" "No," Marcus said honestly. "I think you're a small, insecure person who makes himself feel big by hurting others. I think you're so afraid of being seen as weak that you've become exactly what you fear. You're not strong, Tyler, you're just cruel, and there's a difference." The parking lot seemed to freeze. Even the wind stopped blowing, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Tyler's face went from red to purple, his hands clenching into fists. "Tomorrow," Tyler said, his voice low and dangerous. "After school, behind the buses where teachers can't see. You and me, we're going to settle this." Marcus knew this was the moment. The line that once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. He thought of his father's words, of 8 years of training, of the promise he'd made. Then he thought of David's terrified face, of all the other victims Tyler had created, of a system that protected bullies and abandoned their prey. "No," Marcus said simply. "No," Tyler repeated, incredulous. "You're refusing to fight me?" "I'm refusing to fight you on your terms," Marcus clarified. "You want to settle this? We settle it right here, right now, with everyone watching. No hiding behind buses, no secret confrontations. You want to fight me, Tyler? Then do it where everyone can see what kind of person you really are." Tyler glanced around the crowded parking lot, seeing dozens of students watching their confrontation. The public nature of it clearly made him uncomfortable. He was used to conducting his bullying in controlled environments where he could craft the narrative. "Fine," he said finally. "Tomorrow, right here in the parking lot after school. Everyone will see me destroy you." "We'll see," Marcus said, turning back to his car. "Hey, Marcus," Tyler called after him. "You might want to call your daddy tonight. Tell him goodbye, because after tomorrow you're going to be eating through a straw." Marcus didn't respond. He got in his car and drove away, leaving Tyler standing in the parking lot surrounded by excited whispers from students already spreading the word about tomorrow's fight. As he drove, Marcus pulled out his phone at a red light and did something he hadn't done in weeks. He called his father. The phone rang several times before connecting, the delay indicating the call was being routed through military channels to wherever Colonel Rivera was currently stationed. "Marcus," his father's voice was concerned, "is everything okay? You don't usually call during the week." "Dad," Marcus said, surprised to find his voice catching slightly, "I need to tell you something." He explained everything: the weeks of bullying, the escalation, the intervention with David, and tomorrow's confrontation. His father listened without interrupting, letting Marcus get it all out. "I know you told me violence should be the last resort," Marcus said. "I know I promised to only fight when I had no other choice. But Dad, I don't think I have another choice anymore. It's not just about me. He's hurting other people, and nobody's stopping him." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When his father finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "Son, do you remember what I told you when you started training? The full conversation? That violence should be the last resort." "That was part of it," his father agreed. "But do you remember what else I said? I said a real warrior uses violence as the absolute last resort. I said you should walk away from every fight you can. But Marcus, the key word there is can. Sometimes walking away isn't possible. Sometimes standing up to a bully is the only way to protect not just yourself, but others who can't protect themselves." Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. "So you're saying I should fight him?" "I'm saying that only you can decide if you've reached the point of last resort," his father said. "But son, if you decide this is that moment, if you decide that fighting is the only option left, then you fight with everything I've taught you. You fight with honor, with control, but you fight to win. Bullies like this Tyler kid, they only understand one language. And sometimes speaking their language is the only way to make them stop." "I'm scared, Dad," Marcus admitted. "Not of fighting him. I'm scared of what I might do. I'm scared of losing control." "The fact that you're scared of that tells me you won't," his father said. "Your training isn't just about techniques, Marcus. It's about discipline. It's about knowing how much force to use and when to stop. Trust your training. Trust yourself. And remember, I'm proud of you no matter what happens." After they said goodbye, Marcus spent the rest of the evening in meditation, a practice his first sensei had insisted was as important as physical training. He cleared his mind, centered himself, and prepared for what was to come. Tomorrow would change everything one way or another. Friday morning arrived grey and overcast, with clouds that threatened rain but couldn't quite commit to it. Marcus arrived at school to find the atmosphere electric with anticipation. Word of the after-school fight had spread to every corner of Westfield High. Students who normally ignored him now watched him pass with expressions ranging from pity to morbid excitement. Some offered words of encouragement, others warnings about Tyler's reputation as a fighter. In first-period English, Mrs. Patterson kept glancing at him with concern. She'd clearly heard about what was planned and seemed to be debating whether to intervene. Finally, as class was ending, she called him to her desk. "Marcus, I've heard some concerning rumors," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure other students couldn't hear. "If someone is threatening you, you need to report it to the administration." "I already tried that," Marcus replied. They suggested I was projecting negativity. Mrs. Patterson's expression darkened. She knew as well as anyone how the school's power dynamics worked. Violence is never the answer, Marcus. Sometimes it's the only question anyone's willing to hear, Marcus said, gathering his books. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Patterson. You're one of the few teachers here who actually seems to care. The day passed in a blur. In every class, Marcus could feel eyes on him, whispers following him. Tyler and his crew were notably absent from the classes they shared, probably skipping to prepare for the afternoon's confrontation. At lunch, Marcus found himself sitting with David and several other students who had been victims of Tyler's bullying over the years. "You don't have to do this," David said, his voice earnest behind his thick glasses. "You could just leave. Go home sick or something." "That wouldn't solve anything," Marcus replied. "He'd just be waiting for me Monday, and it would be worse." "He's going to hurt you," a girl named Jennifer said. She had been one of Tyler's targets the previous year, subjected to a campaign of harassment that had nearly driven her to transfer schools. "He doesn't fight fair. Jake and Connor will probably jump in if you start winning." "I know," Marcus said simply. "Then why?" David asked. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus looked around the table at their faces, all bearing the invisible scars of Tyler's cruelty. "Because somebody has to. Because every day that he gets away with this, he gets worse. Because maybe if one person stands up to him, really stands up to him, others will too." The final bell of the day rang at 3:15, but instead of the usual rush to leave, students began gathering in the parking lot. By 3:30, there were probably 200 people forming a rough circle near the buses, with more arriving every minute. Marcus walked through the crowd, hearing snippets of conversation, most betting on how quickly Tyler would destroy him. Tyler was already there, standing in the center of the circle with Jake and Connor. He'd removed his Letterman jacket and was wearing a tight t-shirt that showed off his muscular build. He was bouncing on his feet, throwing shadow punches, playing to the crowd like a professional wrestler. "There he is," Tyler announced as Marcus approached. "The hero of Westfield High, the defender of nerds and losers everywhere." The crowd laughed, but it was nervous laughter. There was something different about this confrontation, something that made it feel more serious than typical high school drama. Marcus stepped into the circle, his movements calm and controlled. He set down his backpack and removed his hoodie, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath. He didn't bounce or shadow box or play to the crowd. He simply stood there, centered and ready, his body relaxed but alert. "Last chance to run away, Marcus," Tyler said, still playing to the audience. "Last chance to admit what you are." "What I am," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the parking lot, "is someone who gave you every opportunity to leave me alone. I tried to avoid you. I tried to ignore you. I tried to walk away. I took your abuse for over a month without responding. But you wouldn't stop. You had to keep pushing. You had to hurt other people. So now we're here." Tyler's grin faltered slightly. There was something in Marcus's tone that didn't match the scared kid he'd been tormenting. "Big words. Let's see if you can back them up." They began circling each other, and immediately Marcus could see everything wrong with Tyler's stance. His hands were too low, his weight distribution was off, his footwork was sloppy. He was a brawler who relied on size and aggression, not someone with actual training. Tyler threw the first punch, a wide haymaker that telegraphed itself from a mile away. Marcus didn't just dodge it, he barely moved, swaying just enough that the fist passed harmlessly by his head. The missed punch threw Tyler off balance, and he stumbled slightly before recovering. The crowd murmured. They'd expected Marcus to cower or run. They hadn't expected him to move like that. Tyler attacked again, this time with a combination of punches that looked impressive but lacked any real technique. Marcus weaved through them effortlessly, his footwork perfect, his body moving with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice. He didn't throw a single punch in return, just evaded everything Tyler threw at him. "Stop running and fight!" Tyler snarled, frustration evident in his voice. "I'm not running," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm just letting you tire yourself out." Tyler charged forward with a roar, trying to tackle Marcus to the ground. It was the mistake Marcus had been waiting for. As Tyler lunged, Marcus pivoted on his back foot, grabbed Tyler's extending arm, and used his momentum against him in a perfect judo throw. Tyler hit the asphalt hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The crowd gasped. Tyler Morrison, the untouchable bully of Westfield High, was on his back gasping for air, while Marcus Rivera stood over him completely calm. Tyler scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage. Lucky shot. This time, Marcus didn't wait for Tyler to attack. He stepped forward with a speed that made several people in the crowd step back reflexively. His jab snapped out like a whip, catching Tyler square in the nose. Blood immediately began flowing as Tyler staggered backward. "That's for week 1, Marcus said. Before Tyler could recover, Marcus threw a perfect cross that caught him in the solar plexus, folding him in half. "That's for week 2, a knee to the ribs that Tyler barely blocked. Week 3, an uppercut that snapped Tyler's head back. Week 4... Tyler was reeling now, blood streaming from his nose, barely able to stand. But Marcus wasn't finished. He grabbed Tyler by the shirt, pulling him close. "And this," Marcus said, "is for David and Jennifer and everyone else you've hurt." But instead of delivering a finishing blow, Marcus did something unexpected. He let go of Tyler's shirt and stepped back. "I could end this right now," Marcus said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I could hurt you the way you've hurt others. I could humiliate you, destroy you, make you feel as small and helpless as you've made so many people feel. But I won't, because I'm not you." Tyler stood there, swaying, blood dripping onto his expensive shirt. The crowd was completely silent. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued. "You're going to stop. No more bullying. No more harassment, no more making people's lives miserable for your entertainment. If I hear about you targeting anyone at all, we'll have another conversation, and next time, I won't hold back." "You think you've won?" Tyler spat blood onto the asphalt. "You think this changes anything?" "No," Marcus said. "I think this is a beginning. I think people are starting to see that you're not invincible, that you're just a scared kid who hurts others because he doesn't know any other way to feel powerful." That's when Jake and Connor started moving forward, apparently deciding their friend needed help. Marcus shifted his stance slightly, preparing for multiple opponents. But before they could take 2 steps, something unexpected happened. Other students stepped forward, blocking their path. David was there, along with Jennifer and several others who had been Tyler's victims. Then more students joined them, people who had watched in silence for too long, people who had been bystanders to cruelty, and finally found the courage to stand up. "It's over, Tyler," someone called out. "You're done." Tyler looked around the circle, seeing former followers, former victims, and former bystanders all united against him. The power structure he'd built through fear and intimidation was crumbling before his eyes. But Tyler Morrison hadn't ruled Westfield High through fear alone. He'd also done it through a complete inability to accept defeat. With a snarl of rage, he launched himself at Marcus one more time, throwing a desperate haymaker with all his remaining strength. Marcus saw it coming. He had all the time in the world to dodge, to counter, to end the fight decisively. But he also saw something else, a teachable moment, an opportunity to show everyone watching the difference between strength and brutality. He caught Tyler's fist in his palm, stopping the punch cold. The impact made a loud smack that echoed through the parking lot. Tyler's eyes went wide as he tried to pull his hand back, but Marcus's grip was like iron. "You're done, Tyler," Marcus said quietly. "Accept it." With a simple wrist manipulation that his jiu-jitsu instructor had taught him years ago, Marcus forced Tyler to his knees. The bully cried out in pain, his free hand slapping the ground in submission. Marcus released him immediately and stepped back. Tyler remained on his knees for a moment, cradling his wrist, before Jake and Connor helped him to his feet. The three of them pushed through the crowd without another word, Tyler's reign of terror ending not with a bang, but with a whimper. As the crowd began to disperse, students approaching Marcus with words of thanks or admiration, he noticed several teachers standing at the edge of the parking lot. They'd obviously been watching the entire fight, but had chosen not to intervene. Among them was Mrs. Patterson, who gave him a small nod that might have been approval. Monday morning at Westfield High School was unlike any Marcus had experienced at any school he'd attended. He walked through the front doors to find the hallways buzzing with energy, but not the nervous tension that had characterized the past month. Instead, there was something lighter in the atmosphere, like a weight had been lifted from the entire building. Students who had never acknowledged his existence before now nodded at him in the hallways. Not with the hero worship he'd feared, but with simple respect. He wasn't Marcus Rivera, the victim, anymore, nor was he Marcus Rivera, the fighter. He was just Marcus, a student who had stood up when it mattered. At his locker, he found a note that simply said, "Thank you," in handwriting he didn't recognize. Throughout the day, he would find similar notes in his textbooks, on his desk, even tucked into his backpack when he wasn't looking. The authors remained anonymous, but their gratitude was genuine. Tyler, Jake, and Connor were notably absent on Monday. Rumors circulated that Tyler's parents had been called in for a meeting with the principal, that the accumulation of complaints that had been ignored for so long were suddenly being taken seriously now that their son was no longer untouchable. When they returned on Tuesday, they were different, subdued. Tyler kept his head down, avoided eye contact, and spoke only when spoken to. The transformation was so complete that Marcus almost felt sorry for him. Almost. At lunch on Tuesday, Marcus found his usual corner table occupied. Sarah Martinez was there, along with David, Jennifer, and several other students he'd come to recognize as Tyler's former victims. They'd saved him a seat. "We figured you might want some company," Sarah said, as he approached with his tray. Marcus sat down, feeling oddly uncomfortable with the attention. "You don't have to do this. I didn't fight Tyler to make friends." "We know," Jennifer said. "That's exactly why we want to be your friend." As the days passed, Marcus found himself at the center of a growing social circle. Not the popular crowd, he had no interest in that kind of status, but a group of genuine people who understood what it meant to stand up for something. They ate lunch together, studied together, and slowly helped each other heal from the wounds Tyler and others like him had inflicted. 2 weeks after the fight, Marcus was walking to his car after school when he heard someone call his name. He turned to find Tyler standing alone by the buses, looking smaller somehow without his usual entourage. "Can we talk?" Tyler asked, his voice lacking any of its former arrogance. Marcus considered for a moment, then nodded. They walked to a quiet spot behind the school, the same place where Tyler had first threatened him all those weeks ago. "I wanted to apologize," Tyler said, the words coming out stilted and uncomfortable. "Really apologize. Not just because my parents are making me, or because the school is threatening suspension. I mean it." Marcus studied Tyler's face, looking for deception, but finding only exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. "I've been seeing a therapist," Tyler continued. "She's helping me understand why I did the things I did. It doesn't excuse it, but I'm starting to see that I was taking out my own issues on other people." "What kind of issues?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious despite himself. Tyler laughed bitterly. You really want to know? My dad's been having affairs for years. Everyone knows but pretends they don't. My mom drinks herself to sleep every night. The only time they pay attention to me is when I'm winning at something, sports, grades, whatever. So I made sure I was always winning, even if it meant making other people lose. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this information. That explains it, but it doesn't excuse it. I know, Tyler said quickly. I'm not trying to excuse it. I wanted you to know that I understand now how messed up I was, how messed up I am, and I wanted to thank you. Thank me? Marcus was surprised. For humiliating you in front of the entire school? For stopping me, Tyler corrected. I was spiraling, getting worse every day. If you hadn't stopped me when you did, I don't know how far I would have gone. Someone could have gotten seriously hurt. I could have ruined my entire future. Marcus thought about this, about the strange turns life could take. So what now? Now I try to be better, Tyler said. I'm transferring to private school next semester. My parents think it will be a fresh start, but really I think it's better for everyone if I'm not here. Too much history, too much damage done. You could try to make amends, Marcus suggested. Apologize to the people you hurt. I've started, Tyler said. Some people accept it, some don't. Jennifer told me to go to hell, which I probably deserved. David actually seemed relieved, like my apology gave him some kind of closure. It's a process. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Tyler spoke again. Can I ask you something? Where did you learn to fight like that? I mean, I've been in plenty of fights, but you were on a completely different level. Marcus considered how much to reveal. 8 years of mixed martial arts training. Karate, jiu-jitsu, boxing, some Muay Thai. My dad insisted after I got badly bullied in elementary school. Tyler's eyes widened. 8 years? And you just let me push you around for a month? I made a promise to only fight as a last resort, Marcus explained. Violence should never be the first answer, or the second, or the third. You pushed until it became the only answer left. I really am sorry, Tyler said again, for everything. The humiliation, the harassment, and especially for... He gestured vaguely at Marcus's face, where the faint remains of bruising from the knee strike were still visible. That was when you crossed the line, Marcus said. Having your friends hold me while you attacked me. That was when I knew talking and walking away would never be enough. Tyler winced at the memory. Yeah, that was unforgivable. I was so angry that you wouldn't react, wouldn't give me the satisfaction of fighting back. I wanted to break you. You nearly did, Marcus admitted. If my dad hadn't talked me through it, reminded me of why I train, and when it's appropriate to use that training, I might have done something we'd both regret. Worse than what you did do? Marcus's expression darkened slightly. Tyler, I could have put you in the hospital. I could have broken bones, torn ligaments, caused permanent damage. What I did was controlled, measured. I hurt you enough to make a point, not enough to cause lasting harm. Trust me, it could have been much worse. Tyler swallowed hard, seeming to truly understand for the first time how much danger he'd been in. Your restraint is impressive. It's necessary, Marcus said. With the skills I have, restraint isn't just important, it's mandatory. Using full force on someone without training would be like bringing a gun to a fistfight. It's not fair, and it's not right unless there's genuinely no other choice. The conversation wound down after that, both of them running out of things to say. As Tyler walked away, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. He'd started as the victim and Tyler as the victimizer, but somewhere along the way, those roles had become more complex. Tyler was still responsible for his actions, still accountable for the harm he'd caused, but he was also a damaged kid working through his own issues in destructive ways. The next few weeks passed peacefully. Tyler kept his word, avoiding not just Marcus, but anyone he'd previously targeted. Jake and Connor, deprived of their leader, seemed to deflate, becoming just regular students rather than enforcers of Tyler's will. The culture of the school shifted gradually but noticeably. Teachers reported fewer disciplinary issues, counselors saw a decrease in students reporting bullying, and the general atmosphere became more inclusive. Marcus found himself in an unexpected position of informal leadership. Students came to him with problems, seeking advice or intervention. He was careful to avoid becoming what he'd fought against, never using his reputation or skills to intimidate or control. Instead, he tried to mediate, to find peaceful solutions where possible, and to stand as a deterrent to those who might prey on the weak. One afternoon, Principal Henderson called Marcus to her office. He walked there with some trepidation, wondering if there would finally be official consequences for the parking lot fight. "Sit down, Marcus," Mrs. Henderson said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too many years of teenage drama. "Am I in trouble?" Marcus asked directly. "No," she said, surprising him. "Actually, I wanted to thank you off the record." Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "I know what happened in the parking lot 2 weeks ago," she said. "I know you fought Tyler Morrison, and I know why. Officially, I have to condemn violence and say that you should have come to the administration with your problems. Unofficially, we both know that wouldn't have helped." "The Morrisons are major donors," Marcus said, not accusingly but as a statement of fact. Mrs. Henderson sighed. "They are, and that has, regrettably, influenced how certain situations were handled. Or not handled. That's changing now. The school board has implemented new anti-bullying policies that will be enforced regardless of who the perpetrator's parents are. Because of what happened. Because what happened opened a lot of eyes," she said. Parents started calling, demanding to know why their children had been suffering in silence. Students felt empowered to report incidents they'd previously kept quiet about. The bubble of silence around Tyler Morrison's behavior burst, and we couldn't ignore it anymore. Marcus nodded, understanding. "So, what happens now?" "Now we try to do better," Mrs. Henderson said. "We're implementing peer mediation programs, increasing counselor availability, and creating safe spaces for students to report bullying without fear of retaliation. We're also starting a self-defense program in PE, teaching students basic techniques for protecting themselves. Would you like help with that?" Marcus offered. "I could assist with the self-defense classes." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "I was hoping you'd volunteer. Coach Anderson speaks highly of your skills and your control. He mentioned that you've been helping some of the smaller students during PE, teaching them how to avoid confrontation and defend themselves if necessary." This was true. After the fight with Tyler, Coach Anderson had approached Marcus with a grudging respect and asked if he'd be willing to help students who were being targeted. Marcus had agreed, teaching basic defensive moves and, more importantly, the confidence that came from knowing you could protect yourself. "There's something else," Mrs. Henderson continued. "The district is implementing a new position, Student Safety Liaison. It's a volunteer position, but it comes with a small stipend and looks excellent on college applications. The liaison would work with administration to identify and address bullying, mediate conflicts, and help create a safer school environment. I'd like you to consider it." Marcus was surprised by the offer. "Why me?" "Because you've already shown the judgment and restraint necessary for the position," she said. "You stood up to a bully without becoming one yourself. You used exactly as much force as necessary, and no more. And most importantly, you've shown that you care about protecting others, not just yourself." Marcus thought about it for a moment. Can I have some time to consider? Of course. Think about it and let me know by the end of the week. As Marcus left the principal's office, he reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. He'd gone from being the school's victim to being offered a position of responsibility. It was a transformation he hadn't expected or sought, but one that felt right somehow. That evening, he called his father to tell him about the offer. Colonel Rivera listened with pride evident in his voice, even from thousands of miles away. "You've learned the most important lesson, son," his father said. "True strength isn't about being able to hurt others. It's about being able to protect them. It's about using your power responsibly, with restraint and wisdom. I'm proud of you." "I was scared, Dad," Marcus admitted. "When I was fighting Tyler, I was scared of how easy it would be to really hurt him. How much a part of me wanted to." "That's human," his father said. "The fact that you recognized that impulse and controlled it shows maturity beyond your years. The best warriors are the ones who understand the weight of violence, who use it reluctantly and only when necessary." Marcus accepted the student safety liaison position and threw himself into the role with the same dedication he'd applied to his martial arts training. He organized workshops on conflict resolution, bringing in speakers who had overcome their own experiences with bullying. He created a peer support network where students could find allies and advocates. He worked with the administration to identify problem areas in the school where bullying was most likely to occur and implemented strategies to increase supervision and support in those zones. Tyler Morrison kept his word about transferring schools, leaving Westfield High at the end of the semester. Before he left, he found Marcus one more time, this time in the library where Marcus was tutoring David in algebra. "I wanted to say goodbye," Tyler said awkwardly, "and to tell you that I've been accepted to Riverside Academy. It's a boarding school with a good reputation for helping students with behavioral issues." "That's good," Marcus said sincerely. "I hope you find what you're looking for there." Tyler pulled out an envelope and handed it to Marcus. "This is for you." "Well, not for you exactly. It's a donation to the anti-bullying program you're running. It's not much, but I wanted to contribute something positive before I left." Marcus opened the envelope to find a check for $1,000. "Tyler, It's from my own money," Tyler said quickly, "not my parents'. I've been working weekends at one of my dad's dealerships. I figured I owed something to the people I hurt, and this seemed like a way to help." David, who had been silent during the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "I forgive you, Tyler." Both older boys looked at him in surprise. "You hurt me," David continued, his voice steady behind his thick glasses. "You made my life miserable for weeks. But I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because holding on to that anger is hurting me more than it's hurting you." Tyler's eyes were suspiciously bright as he nodded. "Thank you, David. That means more than you know." After Tyler left, David looked at Marcus. "Did I do the right thing?" "There is no right or wrong when it comes to forgiveness," Marcus said. "It's a personal choice. You did what felt right for you, and that's all that matters." As the school year progressed, Marcus watched Westfield High transform. It wasn't perfect, no high school ever is, but it was better. Students walked the halls with more confidence, knowing that there were systems in place to protect them. The culture of silence that had allowed bullies to thrive was replaced with a culture of speaking up, of standing together. Marcus's martial arts training had prepared him for physical confrontation, but his experience at Westfield High had taught him something equally valuable, that true victory isn't about defeating an enemy, but about transforming a situation. He hadn't just beaten Tyler Morrison in a fight, he'd helped catalyze a change that made the entire school safer for everyone. Spring arrived with its promise of new beginnings, and Marcus found himself looking forward to senior year. His family would be staying put for at least another year, giving him the chance to graduate from Westfield High. He'd made real friends, found a purpose beyond just survival, and learned that sometimes the hardest fights are the ones where you have to show restraint. One warm April afternoon, Marcus was practicing forms in the gym after school when Coach Anderson approached him. "You've made quite an impact here, Rivera," the coach said, his gruff voice carrying a respect that would have been unthinkable months earlier. "I just did what needed to be done, Coach." "No," Anderson disagreed. "You did more than that. You showed us all a mirror, made us look at what we'd been allowing to happen. I owe you an apology. I knew what my nephew was doing, and I looked the other way. That was wrong." Marcus was surprised by the admission. "We all make mistakes, Coach. The important thing is learning from them." Anderson nodded. "Speaking of learning, I've been watching you teach the self-defense segments in PE. You're a natural teacher. Have you thought about what you want to do after high school?" Marcus had been thinking about it quite a bit lately. "I'm considering criminal justice, maybe with a minor in psychology. I want to understand not just how to stop bullies, but why they become bullies in the first place. Maybe work in juvenile rehabilitation or conflict resolution." "You'd be good at that," Anderson said. "You've got the physical skills, but more importantly, you've got the empathy. You could have destroyed Tyler that day, but you chose to teach instead. That's rare." As Coach Anderson walked away, Marcus continued his forms, moving through the familiar patterns with a meditation-like focus. Each movement was precise, controlled, purposeful. Much like the journey he'd taken at Westfield High, he'd arrived as a victim, evolved into a protector, and emerged as a leader. The dojo where Marcus trained had a saying painted on the wall: "The ultimate aim of martial arts is not having to use them." For 8 years, Marcus had read those words without truly understanding them. Now, after everything that had happened, he finally got it. The goal wasn't to avoid all confrontation, but to develop the wisdom to know when confrontation was necessary and the skill to handle it with appropriate force. As he finished his forms and began to pack up his gear, Marcus heard voices in the hallway. A group of freshmen walked past the gym doors, laughing and talking without the nervous edge that had characterized underclassmen when Tyler ruled the school. They moved freely, unafraid, safe in the knowledge that Westfield High was a place where they could learn and grow without fear. That, Marcus thought, was the real victory. Not the fight in the parking lot, not Tyler's submission or departure, but this, the laughter of students who felt safe. He'd helped create that, not through violence, but through the careful, controlled application of strength when all other options had failed. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Martinez. "Study group at the library in 20. David's bringing cookies his mom made. You in?" Marcus smiled and typed back, "On my way." As he left the gym, Marcus passed the trophy case where photos of Westfield High's athletic achievements were displayed. Someone had added a new photo, a group shot of the peer mediation team with Marcus in the center, surrounded by students who had once been victims, but were now advocates for others. It wasn't a traditional sports trophy, but it represented a different kind of victory. The parking lot where he'd fought Tyler was now just a parking lot again, the site of a transformation rather than a confrontation. Marcus walked to his car, no longer checking over his shoulder for threats, no longer mapping escape routes. He was still alert. 8 years of training doesn't just disappear, but the hypervigilance had been replaced with calm awareness. His phone rang as he reached his car. It was his father, calling from wherever his deployment had taken him. "Hey, Dad. Marcus, I wanted to check in. How are things going?" "Good," Marcus said, and meant it. "Really good. We're implementing new programs at school, helping students who are dealing with bullying. I'm teaching self-defense techniques in PE, but more importantly, I'm teaching when not to use them." "That's my son," Colonel Rivera said with evident pride. "You've learned the hardest lesson, that true strength comes from restraint, true power from protection. Your mother would be so proud." Marcus felt a familiar pang at the mention of his mother, who had passed away when he was 12. She'd been the gentle counterbalance to his father's warrior spirit, teaching him that compassion was not weakness, but another form of strength. "I think she would be," Marcus agreed. "Dad, when you get back, I want you to meet my friends. I actually have friends now, real ones." "I'd like that," his father said. "I'll be home for your graduation. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." After they said goodbye, Marcus sat in his car for a moment, watching the sun set over Westfield High. In a few months, he'd be graduating, moving on to college, and whatever came next. But he would leave knowing that he'd made a difference, that he'd stood up when it mattered, that he'd used his strength not for domination, but for protection. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Marcus's first-period English class. Mrs. Patterson was introducing a new transfer student, a skinny kid with nervous eyes who kept his head down and his shoulders hunched. Marcus recognized the posture immediately. It was the same one he'd adopted when he first arrived at Westfield High. After class, Marcus approached the new student. "Hey, I'm Marcus. If you need someone to show you around, help you find your classes, or just want someone to sit with at lunch, let me know." The kid looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. "Really? That would be great. I'm Alex." "Nice to meet you, Alex. Fair warning, the cafeteria food is terrible, but the vending machines by the gym have decent snacks if you're desperate." Alex smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Thanks for the tip." As Marcus walked Alex to his next class, pointing out important landmarks and introducing him to friendly faces, he realized that this was his legacy at Westfield High. Not the fight with Tyler, not the fear he'd instilled in potential bullies, but this, creating an environment where a new kid could arrive and find immediate support instead of predation. The cycle of bullying that had defined Westfield High for so long had been broken. It hadn't been easy, and it had required Marcus to violate the promise he'd made to his father about avoiding violence. But sometimes, he'd learned, keeping the peace requires a willingness to fight for it. The key was knowing when that moment had arrived and having the skill and restraint to use exactly as much force as necessary and not one bit more. As the school year drew to a close, Marcus received a letter that would shape his future in ways he couldn't yet imagine. It was from a martial arts academy in California that also offered a degree program in conflict resolution and juvenile justice. They'd heard about his work at Westfield High through one of his former instructors and were offering him a full scholarship. "This is amazing," Sarah said when he shared the news at their study group. "You could become like a professional anti-bullying expert or something. Or a counselor for troubled teens," Jennifer suggested. "Someone who understands both sides of the equation." David, now more confident after months of support and friendship, added, "Whatever you do, you'll be helping people. That's what you're good at." Marcus looked around the table at his friends, people who had been brought together by shared trauma but had stayed together through genuine connection. They'd all grown stronger, not just individually, but as a group. The bullying they'd experienced had scarred them, but it had also taught them the value of standing together, of supporting each other, of refusing to be silent in the face of injustice. Graduation day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance typical of American high schools. Marcus sat with his class, wearing the cap and gown that made everyone look vaguely identical, listening to speeches about futures and dreams and the roads that lay ahead. When Principal Henderson called his name, he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, and the applause was noticeably louder than it had been for other students. After the ceremony, Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers. Teachers who had watched his transformation, students who had been inspired by his example, parents who thanked him for making the school safer for their children. It was overwhelming and humbling in equal measure. His father had made it back for graduation as promised, looking older and more weathered, but with the same steady strength Marcus had always admired. Colonel Rivera stood tall in his dress uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons that told stories of service and sacrifice. "I'm proud of you, son," he said, pulling Marcus into a rare hug. "You've become everything I hoped you would be and more. You took the skills I helped you develop and used them not for glory or dominance, but for protection and justice. That's the mark of a true warrior." As the celebration continued around them, Tyler Morrison appeared at the edge of the crowd. He looked different, healthier somehow, more at peace with himself. He was wearing a Riverside Academy polo shirt and seemed hesitant to approach. Marcus excused himself from his father and walked over to Tyler. "I didn't think you'd come," Marcus said. "I almost didn't," Tyler admitted. "But I needed to. I needed to see this through, to close this chapter properly." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Riverside has been good for me. The structure, the therapy, the chance to start over. I'm not the same person who terrorized this school." "I can see that," Marcus said, and he could. The cruel edge that had defined Tyler was gone, replaced by something more thoughtful, more self-aware. "I wanted to tell you that I'm going to study psychology," Tyler said. "I want to understand what made me the way I was, and maybe help other kids who are heading down the same path. It's not redemption exactly, but it's something." Marcus extended his hand, and Tyler shook it. "Everyone deserves a chance to change, Tyler. The fact that you're taking that chance seriously says a lot." As Tyler walked away, Marcus reflected on the strange journey they'd both taken. They'd started as victim and victimizer, clear-cut roles in a familiar drama. But life was more complex than that. Tyler had been a victim too, in his own way, acting out pain and insecurity in destructive ways. And Marcus had been forced to become something more than just a victim, to find the strength not just to defend himself, but to change an entire culture. The summer passed quickly, filled with preparation for college and goodbye gatherings with friends who would soon be scattered across the country. Marcus spent time at his old dojo, teaching younger students and sharing the lessons he'd learned about when to fight and when to find another way. On his last day at the dojo, Master Chen, the head instructor, presented him with a gift, a simple wooden plaque with an inscription in Japanese and English. "True victory is victory over oneself." "You've earned this," Master Chen said, "not through your physical skills, which are considerable, but through your wisdom in knowing when and how to use them. You've achieved true victory, Marcus. You've conquered not an external enemy, but your own impulses toward both violence and passivity. You found the middle way." As Marcus packed his car for the drive to California and his new life, he took one last look at Westfield High School. The building looked the same as it had the day he'd arrived, but he knew it was fundamentally different inside. The hallways that had once been hunting grounds for predators were now safe passages. The cafeteria that had been a stage for public humiliation was now just a place to eat lunch. The parking lot where he'd fought Tyler was now just asphalt and painted lines. But more than the physical spaces, it was the culture that had changed. Students looked out for each other now. Teachers were more aware, more engaged. The administration had implemented real policies with real consequences. It wasn't perfect. No human institution ever is. But it was better, safer, kinder. Marcus had arrived at Westfield High as the new kid, vulnerable and alone despite his hidden strengths. He was leaving as someone who had made a real difference, who had stood up when it mattered, who had shown that one person with the courage to act could catalyze change in an entire community. As he drove away, his phone buzzed with texts from friends wishing him luck, sharing memories, promising to stay in touch. Among them was a message from an unknown number. When he stopped at a red light, he read it. "You probably don't know me, but I was a sophomore when you stood up to Tyler Morrison. I was being bullied by someone else, and seeing you fight back gave me the courage to report it and get help. You saved me from a really dark place. Thank you." Marcus smiled, feeling the weight and privilege of the impact he'd had. He'd learned to fight so that he wouldn't have to, but when the moment came, when fighting was the only option left, he'd been ready. More importantly, he'd fought not just for himself, but for everyone who couldn't fight for themselves. The road ahead stretched out before him, leading to new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. He would study conflict resolution and juvenile justice, would learn the psychological and sociological factors that create and perpetuate bullying. He would develop programs and strategies to help schools create safer environments. He would teach others not just how to defend themselves physically, but how to build communities where such defense wasn't necessary. But all of that was in the future. For now, Marcus Rivera drove toward the setting sun, carrying with him the lessons of Westfield High. That strength without restraint is merely violence, that true courage sometimes means walking away, but that there are moments when standing up and fighting back is not just acceptable, but necessary. He thought of Tyler Morrison, beginning his own journey of redemption at Riverside Academy. He thought of David, Jennifer, Sarah, and all the others who had found their voices and their courage. He thought of his father, serving overseas, protecting others on a much larger scale. He thought of his mother, whose gentle strength had taught him that compassion and power were not opposites, but complementary forces. The story of Marcus Rivera and Tyler Morrison would be told at Westfield High for years to come, evolving with each telling, becoming legend. But the truth was both simpler and more complex than any legend could capture. It was the story of a young man who had the skills to destroy but chose to protect, who had the power to dominate but chose to liberate, who had every reason to become a bully himself but chose instead to break the cycle. As the miles rolled by and Westfield High disappeared in his rearview mirror, Marcus realized that he'd learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength isn't about being able to win every fight, but about knowing which fights are worth fighting and having the courage to stand up when the moment demands it. The champion who had held back for 8 years had finally stepped forward, not to claim victory for himself, but to ensure safety for others. And in doing so, he discovered that the greatest triumph isn't in defeating an enemy, but in transforming them, and in the process, transforming yourself and the world around you. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Marcus Rivera drove forward with confidence, knowing that whatever challenges awaited, he had the strength, wisdom, and restraint to meet them. He had been tested in the crucible of high school bullying and had emerged not just unbroken, but transformed into someone who could break the cycle for others. Behind him, Westfield High School stood as a testament to the power of one person's courage to catalyze change. Ahead of him lay a future dedicated to ensuring that no child would have to endure what he and so many others had suffered. It was a worthy mission for a true warrior, one who understood that the greatest battles are won not with fists, but with wisdom, compassion, and the courage to stand up when standing up is the only option left.